Hi everybody, I hope you were all well. It's been 3 weeks since you last saw me. But as I said this year, I am taking my time with my reading and such. I want to look at other things in my life and explore other hobbies, and I've kind of been doing that. But also, I've been dealing with a lot of stress at work, so much so that I actually exhausted myself out and I had to take a couple of days leave just to deal with it. But I'm doing fine. It's just, it's been insane at work for the past month or so, and I was working like excessive hours just trying to keep us going and everything, and my body just went nope, you need to have a bit of a break. So I had a couple of days off, and yeah, I've just kind of, with this book that I'm here to review, it was a tough one to read, so I was kind of pacing myself through this book as well. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go with the flow, I'm going to see what happens. And it took me 3 weeks to complete a 500-page book, which usually would take me 1, maybe 2 weeks, depending on how busy I am. But yeah, I'm really glad that I took my time and everything. What else have I been doing? I've been dealing more with my anxiety again, which is quite appropriate given what this book is that I'm reviewing. And I finally watched West Side Story, the 2021 version, because it was very awkward how it came out in the cinema here in the UK because of COVID and all that lot, and also because I was dealing with my anxiety, I couldn't go. And also I had a bit of an issue with it being made in the first place, because the 1960s version of West Side Story is so important to me, because I've loved it so much since I was a child. I was like, no, Steven Spielberg, don't do this, because he destroyed the BFG. I was horrified by what he did with that book. And so the fact that he's that adaptation, even though it was a book adaptation, and this is different, this is a stage and a reimagining of the 1960s film, I was a bit like, no, Stephen, please don't do this to me again. Please, please, please. And it was amazing. I couldn't believe it. Clearly, it's a passion project for him. Clearly, the level of respect that he gave the original stage version, the 1960s version, and the homage that he did to it for various things and then made it his own was brilliant. I've watched it multiple times. I'm going to watch it again today. I watched it yesterday, and I watched the 1960s and then that one back to back, and then I'm going to watch the new one again today, because I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So I'm like, oh god, I love it. So that's kind of been a bit of my obsession for the past week, because it only came out on Blu-ray and DVD here on Monday. So yeah, I'm so glad that I picked it up and I've watched it, and yeah, I'm just love it. But anywho, I am here to talk about the book I've been reading over the past 3 weeks, which is Mad, Bad and Sad, A History of Women and the Mind Doctors from 1800 to Present by Lisa Appignanesi. I said I'd find out how to pronounce her surname correctly, and it's Appignanesi, so there we go. So how did I come across this book? Well, it's thanks to Audible. So there is on Audible, if you don't know, if you're not a member of Audible, there are a load of Audible originals, which are specific things. They could be podcasts, they could be audiobooks, proper audiobooks, or dramas or whatever, which are exclusively for users of Audible, and they are free. This is an Audible original. I think it possibly might be available for non-members now, but I'm not entirely certain of that. So I'm going to say how I came across it, because I was an Audible member. I still am an Audible member. I got recommended it. And it was Stephen Fry's Victorian Secrets, which is where Stephen Fry talks about various aspects of Victorian society. I think there's about 12 episodes, and each one is about an hour long. Yeah, between like half an hour to an hour long. So they vary from episode depending on the subject. And one of the episodes is about asylums, and it was one of my favorite episodes of the whole thing. It was extraordinary to listen to how society viewed asylums and the patients there, and how women, especially, if you got caught up in that, there was no going back. So if you think about it, a woman in Victorian society, as soon as she marries, and this applied also before Victorian society, but as soon as she marries, everything that she owns, everything that she will inherit, goes to her husband. It no longer belongs to her. Any children that she has are the possession of her husband, not her. Getting a divorce was pretty impossible. And so asylums became a way for men to get rid of their wives and just shove them away and just do whatever the hell they wanted. And also with asylums, you could get anyone admitted to an asylum. So if you had a fight with a neighbour could call up someone and say, my neighbour's crazy, and you will be picked up later that day or the next day and shoved into asylum where you cannot get out. So it's quite a scary thing. And Lisa's book is referred to throughout that episode. And I was like, oh God, it'd be really quite interesting to read that. And it just so happened that not long after I listened to it, that Mad, Bad and Sad was sat in Waterstones, in my local Waterstones. And I was like, oh, well, I've got to get it. So I got it. And it's sat on my bookshelf ever since, and now I'm getting around to read it. Also, just so you're aware that Stephen Fry's Victorian Secrets, he's recently done one about Edwardians as well, which is really great. I prefer the Victorian one, but the Edwardian one is very, very interesting as well. I did a whole episode about Peter Pan, which is fabulous. But I will include links to both of those in the description below if you want to check them out. But as I said, I think you might be able to purchase them now, but if you're an Audible member, they are free. But I'm not sure, but details will be in the links that I put below. So I've finally gone around to reading this, and I'm gonna say it was a struggle. It was a real struggle for me to get through this book. As I said, because I've been going through, you know, really stressed at work and exhaustion and everything. It was kind of very interesting that I was reading a book about mental illness and such. But the weight of this book, I didn't anticipate. Now, I'm not saying that I expected it to be like Stephen Fry's Victorian Secrets, where he talks about dark stuff, but it's still quite light because you don't want to bog down the reader. Of course not, because that's a series that just happens to reference this book, but this book is talking about some deep stuff. What I had issue with was the way that Lisa approached this. Now, I thought, or you know, my mind going in, that because it says how a history of women and the mind doctors from 1800 to present, that we were going to have, you know, full accounts of various patients and everything, which there is. But when you get to those individual stories, Lisa's quite cold. She kind of focuses more on the mind doctors and the way in which various illnesses are defined and how they were established and such. And then it's like, oh yeah, and here's somebody who slotted into that. And it's kind of like she looks at these individuals from the science point of view and from the mind doctor's point of view, and not from the person point of view. And so it comes off very cold and harsh. And I was like, oh, okay. But, you know, I went along with that. And especially, and she doesn't really give her own judgments, which is the right thing to do, I would say, especially when you're talking about a sensitive subject about mental illness. But then when you get to the epilogue, it's like, that changed. Now, I suffer from anxiety. I've talked about it multiple times on this channel. I have no experience of other severe mental illnesses, which can range from schizophrenia to deep depressions to anorexia and other eating. So, there's mental illness has a wide spectrum of things, and anxiety is the only part that I have personal experience with. But even then, I was like, anxiety, the way that she approaches it, it's just kind of like, oh, it's just a tick box. Everything goes into a box. All of these illnesses are in a box. And it's like, well no. The way that she structures it is that she has she goes through history in order, but then she's got these chapters that are very distinct, talking about very distinct things. So like sex, eating disorders, schizophrenia, that kind of, so she's very much going along the timeline, but then she's shoving these individual boxes in there. So she might do like a chapter, let's say, on sex and obsessions with sex and such, here, and then over here she does schizophrenia, right? So when she gets to schizophrenia, she's in her timeline, she's hitting like the 1950s and 1960s, and it's like, well, schizophrenia has been around before that. So she very quickly, the very beginning chapter, gives you a brief kind of summary of where it got to up to the 50s, 60s, and then she'll only focus on it from that point. And it's like, how, and to me, it's like, how can you give the full history and the knowledge about a mental illness if you're only going to look at it from the time point where you happen to be in telling the history of mental illness? Because even though, yes, say for example, schizophrenia got proper focus, and like another, like eating disorders and that, especially from like the 1990s, is where she focuses on, anorexia, bulimia and such only really started to be recognized in the 1980s and properly talked about in the 1990s. So it's understandable for that one to have that there. But she talks about how actually Victorians first defined it. But she covers that in like a page, and then it's like, right, let's just focus on the 90s. And it's like, no. Go back. I want to learn more about it. So the way that she's decided to structure it, it's kind of like she's even structuring the histories of conditions into boxes as appropriate to her timeline. And it irked me. And I think that's why it felt slog to get through. I will say also that I totally understand that when it comes to mental illness and talking about it, it's very difficult to know how to write about it, quite possibly. So like, do you do it softly? Do you take the emotion out and just talk about it as facts? Do you approach it in a bluntness? And there are things that are in this book which are quite startling, especially treatments. And I understand, obviously, in the 1800s, mental illness was very different from now and the ways that it's treated and such. And obviously there are going to be some absolutely barbaric ways in which people were treated that can range from like hot baths to lobotomies. And Lisa, I totally respect her telling you exactly what these women went through, because she's telling the history. But I will say that some things were like, that's a lot. that's a lot. And I had to like put the book down for a bit and just, so I took that's why I mentioned about how it can be difficult to write about mental illness, because it is, do you do it softly? Do you take the emotion out and be like, stats, this is it, here you go? Or, you know, do you be blunt and go, yeah, this is what happened? And Lisa kind of did a mixture of the stats, emotionless way, and the bluntness. There are various graphs and such that you see throughout this, and it could be that I would say that this could potentially be kind of a bit triggering for people, depending on what is being covered. So I would say that if you are picking up this book, be cautious. If you do have sensitivities to various things, but at the end of the day, this is in a way, is a history book. It is a history book, and there are things in our history which are horrendous. But yeah, this could be potentially very sensitive for some readers. I do kind of wish that she had kind of mentioned that in the introduction, but you know, it's the way it is. So I do respect her. I respect her for writing this book. I respect her for telling the truth. I respect her for looking at all different, like, wide on the spectrums of mental illness. She doesn't just specifically look at certain ones. She covers a wide range. There are many people within this book, and she also looks at the mind doctors, as you know, referred to, because there's so many different titles and such that cover that. She, although it was mainly a male orientated job, she does look at the points when women start being involved in these areas, and how they establish things, and you know, the developments that have been made, which female mind doctors have been involved in. So I really liked that she covered a wide range. But when it came to the actual individual stories, especially of these poor victims, these women, it felt kind of cold, and that's really sad. I think the human side of this book kind of got stripped away, and it felt almost like their stories, like they're numb. They're not people. They're words on a page. They're a file in a cabinet. And for me, especially with looking back over history and learning things and such, everyone's a person. Everyone has felt all the emotions that anyone can feel, you know. I want to know them as individuals. I want to understand them, and I want them to know, in a way, that their voices have finally been heard. It's kind of like The Five. You know how much, by Helen Rubenhall. You know how much I love that book, if you followed me for a while now. That slapped me in the face and made Jack the Ripper's victims so human. I can literally visualize them now, just like stood in front of me. Just, oh my God, that book shook me to my core, and I wanted that human element in this when talking about various victims, and sadly it just never happened. And it's such a disappointment. It's such a disappointment. So yeah, it's kind of one of those books where I'm feeling a bit relieved that I've done it, that I've gotten through it. But then it's been a funny few weeks for me with, you know, my stress and anxiety, and getting to the point where I just exhausted myself out and I had to take time off work because I couldn't, my body just couldn't carry on anymore. But yeah, I kind of feel like after I finished this book this morning, I could take a deep breath, and it's like, oh, it's a new day, fresh air, you know, kind of feeling. And I shouldn't have to feel that at the end of a book. So even though it did teach me things, I learned so much about the history of diagnosis of various mental illnesses. I learned about treatments. I learned about how things have changed over time, and how we view mental illness now, and all different types of mental illness at the same time. It felt, these past few weeks reading this book, every time I picked it up, it's felt cold. It's felt very scientific, academic, with a lack of empathy. And yeah, I'm just kind of, you know, sometimes a book does that to you. Sometimes it does that to you, and this is what this did to me. I'm not going to do a reading because I'm over 20 minutes in now, and I haven't, you know, but yeah, it's just kind of, it's not a bad book, but I think the way in which Lisa approached the structuring and a lack of empathy about the victims of these treatments through history, I think was the downfall, in a sense, of this book for me. Now, obviously, each to their own. Somebody could have picked this up and given it like a 5-star rating or something, whilst I'd give it probably a 3 out of 5. But yeah, each to their own, each to their own. And maybe it was just because, you know, maybe this was the wrong time for me to read this book. I don't know. But overall, it was a lot to deal with, and I'm glad that it's done. So, it's time for my usual questions. Would I read this again? I'm really debating about this because something in my brain is saying, well, you should, but my heart is kind of saying, well, I don't want to. So I think I'm going to have to go with my heart on this time. My heart's going to overrule my head, and I'm going to say no, I wouldn't read this again. Would I recommend this to anyone? I suppose if somebody was like learning, like going into the medical field or something to do with mental illness and such, maybe that individual. But I wouldn't recommend it to just say, oh, pick this up, it's absolutely amazing. But if you want to learn about history and, you know, from a more scientific point of view about mental illness and such, then yeah, pick it up, see what you think of it. But as just a general read, my gut, my heart is saying no. Would I read any more of Lisa's books? Well, I haven't. This is the first time I've read Lisa's work. As a writer, she's not a bad writer, but I just wonder if it's because of the subject of this book that maybe I need to look into other books of hers to see if this is a running thing in her writing style, or if it's just specifically for this book because of what the subject is. So I am willing to read more of Lisa's books and give her another go. But I have that in mind that, you know, if I find that she's kind of similar style with as she approached this book, then it might be that I'll just have to go, no, Lisa, I can't. I need that empathy, that human element to your story, to your book, in order for me to like it. So we go. So those are my thoughts on Mad, Bad and Sad by Lisa Appignanesi. So, have you read this book? I'd love to know what you think. Leave me a comment in the comments box below, or give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, tell me if you like your side. And I'll be back with my thoughts on my next read, which is The Glass Woman by Carolyn Lee. I'm really looking forward to this. So this is an Icelandic fairy story, a retelling of an Icelandic fairy story, and I need something like that right now. I need something to cleanse the palate, and it's not very long at all, so I think probably this is only going to take me like a week to read, and I'm very, very excited. So I'll be back with my thoughts on The Glass Woman by Caroline Leah as soon as I'm done. Alright guys, bye!